This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, a sell-off in global shares continued into today as surging commodity prices and growing inflationary pressures in the United States prompted bets on earlier interest rate hikes and higher bond yields. Emerging market stocks suffered. Stocks fell about 0.6% on the day to its lowest since late March, as we saw tech shares across the globe sold off today. South Africa's JSE All-Share Index was slightly firmer as investors digested those inflation threats. The resource index was up over 1%, though, as commodity prices rise. Now, also coming up on today's show. The aviation sector in Southern Africa is in desperate need for financial assistance. A recent pipeline attack sparks fuel panic buying in the US. And Nigeria hopes to become the next top avocado exporter in Africa after Kenya. Now, the Airlines Association of Southern Africa is again pleading for urgent financial assistance. The organization, which represents all airlines and associate members across the SADC region, says that African aviation is in desperate need of assistance in order to stay operational. The aviation industry globally has suffered massive losses since the outbreak of COVID-19. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with the details.
African aviation is still struggling from the impacts of COVID. 8 regional airlines filed for bankruptcy in 2020. More may be forced to do the same as air travel remains limited. The Airlines Association of Southern Africa is pleading with governments across the region to assist or risk losing this vital mode of transportation.
The imposition of those travel restrictions, and this is obviously impacting economic recovery, jobs and livelihood as well, which pose a threat to the social stability, peace and security of the region. So it's so critical for us to have an efficient air transport system, and it's vital to any aspiring economy, particularly in Africa, where we've got large distances and between centers.
The organization says apart from limited passenger traffic, airlines still need to service their debt for aircraft financing, pay insurance, salaries and office rentals.
What we've requested is certain ways in which this could be done is through instruments such as interest-free or low-interest loans, grants, subsidies, tax holidays, deferment of taxes, and exemptions if we've applied for a deferment of carbon taxes in South Africa, and the withdrawal or the reduction of charges and levies on air transport.
Governments are working together with the aviation industry towards improving travel with COVID passports, as well as efficient testing and screening. Travel and tourism is expected to recover as more countries roll out vaccines. However, with new variants emerging and a third wave still a concern, it may take a little longer.
Before the pandemic, aviation contributed 7.7 million jobs in Africa, as well as contributed to about $63 billion in African GDP. Since the pandemic struck, our analysis is showing that about 5 million jobs are now at risk. Probably not going to get back to 2019 levels until sometime in 2022 or 2023.
Efforts to mobilize $30 billion pledged by local and international agencies are underway.
So the total amount is that 30 billion that we're looking at. Now, we're trying right now with the African Union to see how we can start to mobilize the funds, because these funds are available through different mechanisms.
While there's been a slight improvement in travel numbers since last year this time, it's nowhere close to pre-pandemic levels. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's stay in the south. The South African National Treasury has warned that the country's debt crisis could deepen further and impact service delivery in the country if the government doesn't cut wasteful expenditure. Now, the government has been struggling for years to stabilize a public debt because of the widening gap between tax revenues and, of course, its spending commitments. Here's Angelo Coppola with the story.
The country's debt for 2020-2021 is around 3.6 trillion rand, and for the current year it's about 4.2 trillion rand, and climbing to 5.3 trillion rand in 2023-24.
So it continues to rise, largely because our interest costs that we pay is higher than our economic growth, which means we don't generate enough tax revenues to pay for the debt service costs. Hence, it continues to accumulate.
Analysts suggest that the government doesn't have a plan to grow the economy.
But if you look at the recovery of the economy, there's nothing new that's coming into the economy from their side over the next couple of years. So actually, unless they spend quite differently from what they have in the past, it would have no positive impact on the economy going forward.
There's been a fair amount of debate on how government can cut its costs to better service its debt levels. Cutting staff in health, policing and education appear to be the first place that government will look.
Which means at the service level delivery point, citizens will encounter fewer service from the government, but also reduced quality because few people cannot provide the same level of quality.
Economists say that the focus for investment should be shifted to the private sector.
Can't rely on government to get the South African economy going again. It's just about making sure that the money is spent on the right areas. If you look at private sector investment, that is where our focus should be, and that is where I think new economic growth would come from. Of course, they need to fix a few things, Eskom being number one.
The state-owned entities and government guarantees have been a drain on the country's budget. That needs to change, as does economic policy.
That's the more durable way to deal with debt, but it requires the economic reforms that are going to lift investment and economic growth.
For sustainable economic growth to happen, it's important that the government gets its debt levels under control. Otherwise, the country is going to be stuck in that quagmire. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, in Nigeria, many pensioners have been left penniless as the government struggles to meet their retirement payments. The backlogs are blamed on corruption and inefficient systems in government. Now, that could change as the government now says it has begun cleaning up the system. Here's CGTN's Phili Haza reporting from Abuja.
74 years old Uzoma Ignatius retired after 31 years of civil service in 2005. He needs cataract surgery but lacks the funds to pay for it because he's still owed 5 years arrears from his pension.
The next surgery will be in July. This one cost me over 100,000, and this thing will be the same thing. So I feel if they will help and pay us that so that I will be able to treat this other one in July.
Millions of pensioners across Nigeria are facing tough times due to non or irregular payment of what they were owed after retiring. The pension industry has been marred by years of corruption and theft by some government officials. According to the Nigerian Pension Reform Tax Team, about $800 million of stolen funds was recovered between 2010 to 2013. Several arrests of corrupt officers have been made, and the government also introduced a new pension program called the Contributory Pension Scheme in 2004.
Unlike previously practiced, the new pension scheme is now a 50-50 arrangement between the government and the pensioners. Workers get to contribute part of their wages while in service as pension, rather than wait for the government alone to fund their pension when they retire.
This has partly taken the burden off the government, and pension experts say the new scheme is also structured better to prevent corruption now that it's a public and private partnership.
The old scheme is exposed to all these forms of corruption because there is no laid out best practices as to how it is managed. But with this tripartite arrangement, where you have the regulator, National Pension Commission, a government agency, you have the pension fund administrators, private entities, and then you have the pension fund custodian. That way, it is foolproof, fully protected from all forms of corruption.
However, as of 2019, over $1 billion of pension funds were still owed by the government, mainly accrued from the old scheme. Experts say until the government pays out its outstanding debt, the problem will linger.
All the years you have worked before the contributory pension scheme in June 2004, all your government is still owing such a person. So until they send that money to your retirement savings account, before your pension fund administrator will now contact you for processing and payments. So you see, that is one of the issues, the ills of the old scheme that has actually snowballed into the contributory pension scheme.
Last month, the government promised to clear all outstanding payments to its retirees by the end of the second quarter in order to phase out the issues from the old pension scheme. That's something that could help the likes of Ignatius improve their standard of living and tell better tales about serving their country. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
And let's take a look at some corporate headlines today. Global investment group Prosus has announced plans to acquire up to 45.4% of shares in its South African parent company, Naspers. Now, the company is set to issue new Prosus shares in a deal aimed at moving part of the value of their massive stake in Tencent from Africa to Europe. Now, Naspers, which will retain control, hopes the deal will improve valuations for both companies. And Nigeria's Ministry of Aviation says the proposed national carrier will improve the country's position with the bilateral air service agreements. It also adds that it will assist in taking full advantage of the single Africa air transport market and reduce air rates through competitive pricing. Now, Nigeria Air will be made up of international airlines, leasing companies, aircraft manufacturers, and institutional investors, with the federal government holding not more than 5%. And ride-hailing companies Uber and Lyft are set to offer free rides to anyone traveling to or from a U.S. COVID-19 vaccination site. People who want to use the program will need to select a vaccination site near them and then redeem the company's offer of a free ride. The initiative is a new facet of President Joe Biden's push to ensure 70% of all U.S. adults get at least one vaccine shot by July 4th. And judges from the European Union's second highest court have rejected a $300 million tax bill, which was lodged against Amazon in 2017. It was all part of an EU crackdown against unfair tax deals between multinationals and EU nations. Now, the Luxembourg-based General Court has ruled that Amazon has not enjoyed a selective advantage in its tax deal with Luxembourg. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, still coming up on the show. Rising cement costs hamper Nigeria's construction businesses. And fixed fees for private schools spark an outcry in South Sudan.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, Nigeria says it will ramp up financial support and tax relief for local manufacturers. The move is aimed at bolstering the nation's industries to take advantage of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, as well as boost government revenues and increase local employment. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with more on that report.
It's a major production day for Henry Ojukwu, the owner of HP Paints. He produces between 400 to 500 drums of paints weekly, but that's 40% short of his average demand. Henry wants to ramp up production, but raising the much-needed capital has been difficult. Now that's about to change as government plans to increase financial support for local manufacturers.
We are experiencing more trial points now because demand is increasing. And as demand increases, your tentacles has to increase. So for us to have more distributing centers, we will need finance, more machines, bigger environment for production to meet up. So if government would see to us, local manufacturers, and see what is what's for us, it will push us to go very far. And as well, the staff strength has to increase, the payments has to increase too.
Nigeria's manufacturing sector has been pivotal in driving economic development. Despite the economic impact of COVID-19, the manufacturing industry has remained resilient, contributing 13% to the nation's GDP and creating over 1.64 million jobs.
I came here 3 years ago to learn paint production, and Mr. Henry has taught me so well that I now manage the factory. So whether he's here or not, I can manage the production. In the future, I hope to have my own factory so I can help create jobs for other youths.
Government says financial support for local manufacturing is essential to bolster the country's GDP and also position Nigeria for the African Continental Free Trade Regime, which was ratified in January. But it doesn't end at funding alone.
To ensure that there is adequate and consistent power supply to power the manufacturing process, is to go beyond giving financial support, giving tax holidays or incentives or waivers and all of that. We need to begin to see how we can guarantee the safety, the security of these businesses and the business owners in the country. We recall that it is not only Nigerians who come to invest in the sector, in the manufacturing sector. Foreigners also come to invest in the Nigerian manufacturing sector. But if their security is not guaranteed, if they are not confident that they can live and work in Nigeria without being kidnapped or being killed, then they will not invest.
The manufacturing sector has a huge potential to create wealth and sustain development. While many local manufacturers like Henry are looking forward to financial aids from government, They're advocating for a reduction in import tax so they can get raw materials at much cheaper rates. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And still in Nigeria, businesses say the cost of construction has soared due to rising cement prices. Now, lawmakers have criticized the dominance of 3 large firms in the country's cement industry, saying their price increases are further delaying construction that is critical to economic recovery.
Nigerian lawmakers said the dominance of 3 large firms was keeping prices high and impeding construction needed to aid the recovery of the economy. Dangote Cement, founded by Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, has 60.6% market share. Lafarge Africa accounts for 21.8%, while Boa Cement has 17.6%. Their dominance stems from a cement import ban that has been in place for most of the last 20 years to develop self-sufficiency in cement production. However, the policy presented challenges over the years. Cement farms raised prices during Nigeria's 2016 recession to counter low sales volumes, and prices have continued to rise.
It has a large effect in what the price of building development will be right now in Nigeria, and it's a lot of problem because already prices are really skyrocketing, but this is due to, there's nothing the developers can do actually, but this is due to the raw materials of the likes of cement and then some other things.
And the direct impact is recorded in reduction in construction by stakeholders.
Because most people that are used to buy, like, let's say 100 bags, when they come, they will look at it and see that their money will not reach up to that 100. They will buy like 40 or 30 bags, you know. And the way market used to move before, because of the price, market don't used to move it now.
Nigeria's high prices are part of a continent-wide trend, and in some cases, sector collaborators have seen cement costs double in price in recent years.
There should be a price control, because from 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, the price is just skyrocketing without no price control, and nobody can tell the manufacturer that this price is beyond the avoidable reach of a common citizen.
The fast way will be to allow import of cement into the country. The slow way will be to invite other cement players, the bigger cement players, who are more efficient with regard to how they run their plants and so on, and who can over time bring prices down.
This is a hard-set equation of market dominance influencing prices, resulting in partially constructed apartments and buildings.
Monopoly or not, I feel that the government, they are still a very big player in regulating some of these things, and they have to come to the table and then make sure that they do what is fair by everybody, and then so that we can have a system that is balanced.
A 2016 World Bank report revealed the final cement prices in Africa are 183% higher on average than world cement prices. A great margin that could hamper Africa's agenda of self-sufficiency and competitive sector growth projections. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now, private schools in South Sudan are calling for a dialogue with the government. That follows the Education Ministry's decision to set fixed fees for independent schools. Now, the government order comes as learning institutions reopen across the nation after more than a year of closures due to COVID-19. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reporting.
According to South Sudan's Ministry of Education, private schools must not charge more than $340 annually for day students. Boarding schools are not allowed to charge more than $850 per year.
A businessman is not satisfied with the money, so he cannot charge reasonable. He can charge anything, but there must be a limit, and there must be regulation, and that's why we have regulated this.
The Education Ministry also stopped private schools from charging extra fees for materials such as textbooks. The owners of private schools argue that the government did not consult them.
Previously, even we have been battling with some of the education officials who come to our schools and charge very expensively in terms of town rent town rates, which we have never heard about it. Like for the case of my school, they came asking even backup dating up to 2016, and you have to pay, which you could go to something millions of money.
There is nowhere in the act, I mean in the law, which indicate that they set school fees for each and every private school.
Private schools say they are faced with a high cost of operations and need to hire foreign teachers to provide quality teaching in schools. They also say the requirements to be put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19, such as water for hand washing, soap and hand sanitizers, have pushed expenses higher. The UN's Children's Agency, UNICEF, says it is donating 900,000 face masks for students across the country. At the moment, water is in place for hand washing, learners are wearing face masks and social distancing is kept in class, but the UN says the challenge will be in maintaining the standard throughout the time children will spend in school. Most schools in South Sudan don't have reliable water sources such as boreholes or tap water. Water supplies used for hand washing are purchased on a daily basis, and the schools say it is expensive. Public education infrastructure is virtually non-existent in South Sudan, and many here rely on private educators. Patrick Koyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still coming up on the show. Air cargo demand keeps most airlines in the air across the globe. And a recent pipeline attack sparks panic fuel buying in the U.S.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN. And 1:30, here's a recap of today's top headlines. Severe hunger has hit southern Madagascar, with more than 1 million people in need of urgent food assistance. Now, the situation has seen people resorting to desperate survival measures, such as eating locust, raw red cactus fruits, or wild leaves. Some are also leaving their villages to reach urban centers supplying food. Now, the World Food Programme says about 14,000 people are estimated to be at a catastrophe level. And India has reported another record number of new deaths. 4,200 more people died in a single day, while infections jumped by nearly 350,000. Even then, health experts warn the real numbers are being underreported, with some believing the toll could be up to 10 times higher. Vaccines are also running short, especially in the country's two biggest cities, and the WHO says the variant driving India's surge has now been found in 44 countries. And an independent panel looking into the COVID-19 pandemic has released a blistering report saying the catastrophic scale of the pandemic could have been avoided and that the World Health Organization should have rung the alarm bell sooner. The panel laid out a list of recommendations to prevent another event on this scale. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Well, let's get you some international news now. Robust air cargo demand has been keeping the international airline industry in the air as travel is still slow to recover from the coronavirus crisis. That's according to a report from the International Air Transport Association. As CGTN's Elena Casas reports from London, international passenger traffic remains at a standstill in much of the world.
Well, passenger planes around the world still remain very much grounded, but IATA Director General Willie Walsh says strong freight revenues have been the difference between life and death for some airlines. Half the world's air freight is usually carried in the hold of passenger planes, so with those flights grounded, prices for cargo freight have shot up, leading some airlines to post record freight earnings last year. The industry body says freight hit 35% of total airline revenue last year, up from about 10% before the crisis, and is likely to stay high for years. Lufthansa's CEO Carsten Spohr said during the company's results presentation recently that he was optimistic about the freight business, and few airline CEOs would say that just now about international passenger travel. Just today, half a dozen airline CEOs signed a call for travel between the UK and US to be reopened without quarantine as soon as possible. The industry boss, Willie Walsh, said governments around the world are failing to manage the risk proportionately, he said, because they're afraid of making decisions. Elena Casas, London.
Meanwhile, fears of a gasoline shortage following the shutdown of a major fuel pipeline in the United States have led to some panic buying, forcing U.S. regulators to reiterate there was no gas shortage in the region. Here's Roy Ruttenberg reporting.
Long lines and prices already on the rise at gas stations across parts of the U.S. on Tuesday.
I saw that there was a line here of cars, and I know that I'll be needing it soon, so why not just wait here?
The panic for petrol after a weekend cyber attack on a major U.S. oil pipeline forced its closure. The nearly 9,000-kilometer pipeline crosses a dozen states and supplies 7 U.S. airports. American Airlines announced it's adding stops to some long-haul flights to conserve fuel at a critical hub. Another U.S. carrier, Southwest, said it's using planes to fly additional fuel to other planes. The pipeline's operator, Colonial, says it hopes to fix the problem by week's end. Officials say a restart will happen gradually.
This pipeline has never been shut down before. It travels great distances. There is fuel in the pipe, and then there is fuel, the offtake from the refineries that have to be added. So it will take a few days.
Some are worried about the domino effects.
We'll run out of storage if the pipeline stays closed. So the price of oil here in Texas could drop because of this oversupply, right? At the same time, storage tanks in the Northeast at the other end of the pipeline are being drawn down. And if that imbalance continues, if we have the supply rise in Texas and this drop in New Jersey and New York, et cetera, prices there are going to go way up. They're going to have fuel shortages. Prices here are going to go down, and we're going to have a supply glut.
Georgia's governor on Tuesday announced he was suspending a state gas tax to help alleviate the pressure on the public and prohibiting price gouging. Meanwhile, there's concern the ransomware attack has further exposed U.S. vulnerabilities.
In New England, we get 60% of our electricity from gas that's brought into the region by pipeline, and yet they don't have the same level of standards of cyber protection for the pipeline system that we have for the grid.
At a hearing on Capitol Hill on Tuesday, government officials echoed the warnings of experts.
Cyber attacks on our nation's infrastructure are growing more sophisticated, frequent, and aggressive. Malicious cyber actors today are dedicating time and resources towards researching, stealing, and exploiting vulnerabilities.
The U.S. says a, quote, Russia-based company, DarkSide, is behind the pipeline attack. But at the same time, the White House says there's only so much federal officials can do when private companies are being targeted, leaving many wondering what can be done to prevent this sort of thing from happening again. Rowie Ruttenberg, CGTN in Washington.
Now, the United Nations says the world economy will fare better this year than previous projections have indicated. However, a slow rollout of COVID-19 vaccines in many developing nations will hamper economic recovery. Now, according to the latest World Economic Situation and Prospects report, global economic growth is expected to reach 5.4%, bouncing back from a contraction of 3.6% in 2020. But the growth outlook in some nations in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America remains fragile and uncertain due to the slow vaccination progress. The UN report also notes that China and the United States are forecast to see economic growth of 8.2% and 6.2% respectively this year, with China being a main driving force for global economic recovery.
The fact that is playing a very important role, the robust investment in China that happened during the last 6 months, and also the merchandise export has increased significantly in terms of electronics and electrical equipment, digital equipment, and all the parts and all the other the manufacturing export from China actually has been very robust, and it has exceeded the pre-crisis level. That is also driving the growth outlook for China.
Well, let's head over to the UK, where Apple stores only reopened just over a month ago. And now the company is facing a lawsuit in London with claims it overcharged its customers. Here's Nicole Johnston with more.
This isn't the only lawsuit Apple is facing around the world, but it's another headache for the company. It's been accused of overcharging almost 20 million UK customers for purchases they make on the App Store. So every time you buy something on the Apple Store, there's a 30% commission that you pay, and the app developers are charged another 15% fee. The claimants in this case say that it's excessive and unlawful. But Apple says that these fees and charges are fair enough, and that 80% of the apps on their store are free. But the company is under fire on many fronts. The European Commission has sent a letter and a statement to Apple accusing it of abusing its power when it comes to music streaming services. This was after it received a complaint from Spotify. But the big case underway is Apple versus Epic Games. And Epic Games is the creator of a video game called Fortnite. Now, Epic Games is accusing Apple of anti-competitive behavior. It says that when it tried to circumvent the App Store, it was kicked off it. And all of this is part of a much bigger debate. At stake is the question, has Apple become such a market dominator that unless you play by its rules, you won't be able to access the millions of customers who use Apple apps and devices? Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
And more in the US, the pandemic has drastically changed the country's film industry. And while Hollywood studios have gradually resumed productions in recent months, production crew recruitment is being affected by the many safety regulations and restrictions that remain in place. Well, our Los Angeles correspondent Edise Tiansen explains.
Linda Harcharik has been a background actor, someone who performs in a non-speaking role for more than 30 years. Normally, she'd be hired just for the days she appears on set, but that has changed during the pandemic.
Some of the shows have been hiring core groups of background actors and carrying them or paying them for a 5-day-a-week work week. And if they're not working, of course, they expect them to quarantine at home on those other days. So I've been lucky to do that for a primetime TV show since last September.
By recruiting fewer numbers of background actors, productions not only aim to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19, but also to cut down on the additional costs of safety measures.
Most of that goes to testing, because the testing protocols are, if you're in Group A and around talent where the PPE is going to be off because they're acting in front of the cameras, those people are getting tested every day. And then there's the next group back that gets tested twice a week. So that's a big expense.
Some background actors are now getting more work than ever before.
I think there's a lot of people who can get consistent show work if they're on a specific show. If they're like background extras for a specific show, I think that they can continue to get a lot of work on that specific show. And certainly if they have to quarantine them, then their value has gone up.
Establishing a fixed team that quarantines together throughout a production has created a greater sense of safety for the whole crew. But it's also created a group of background actors who may not be getting any work.
Some people have complained to me that previously they were able to self-submit for lots of different projects, and that seems to have slowed down. And it seems more that casting companies are reaching out directly now to hire background actors from those they have in their files. So people feel like their opportunities are being limited because of that.
In fact, several agencies that would normally accept submissions from all agents and managers are now going directly through casting companies they've previously worked with.
So what's happening in the landscape now is that the various productions are trying to find their background team that they can rely on, that they know there's a sort of a safety veil there, and put them to work more often. So rather than maybe pay them for a day, they'll put them on a weekly salary.
This dynamic could change as California edges closer to a full reopening, but for the time being, landing on a gig as a production crew can be an all or nothing kind of process. Edise Tiansen, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Well, let's move on now to commodity markets today. Oil prices rising over 1% on signs of a speedy economic recovery, as well as upbeat predictions for energy demand in light of progress with vaccinations against COVID-19. However, waves of infections in India and Brazil did weigh on gains today. Gold prices falling today, weighed down by higher U.S. Treasury yields, and of course a slight rebound in the dollar ahead of the much-awaited U.S. consumer price data coming out today. Well, let's take a short break now. Still to come. Nigeria hopes to become the next top avocado exporter in Africa after Kenya. And a Kenyan IT graduate turns to fashion to make a living.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent, to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, avocado farming is fast gaining traction across the African continent, and that's thanks to huge global demand for the fruit. Nigeria, of course, is one of the countries in Africa ramping up local production now as it seeks to join Kenya as a top exporter of the crop in the next decade. From Abuja, here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reporting on how locals are now taking advantage of the surging demand for the green gold to eke out a living.
It's another good season for avocado farmer Hudong Giang. The 65-year-old has been harvesting her avocados, which are ripe for consumption. She planted them over 20 years ago, and that's been a major source of income for Hudong and her family. She sells an average 18 bags per harvest and makes about $1,500 from the crop.
I harvest these trees twice a year. It does not cost anything to plant an avocado tree. We sell it here in our local market, then outsiders come and buy the produce. The avocados have been so helpful to me over the years. I use the money I earn from the harvest to buy fertilizer from my farm, pay my children's school fees, medical care, foodstuff, and other financial needs.
From the farm to the local market, the cost of the green gold has nearly doubled. Wholesalers like Kenyang Zanyango saw the potential in the commodity early enough and took advantage of it. Now she sells to retailers and also exports the produce.
The market is thriving because we have retailers who buy from us to resell, while we also export the same. This business helps all women here in a lot of ways. Some women come here with no money to start the business, but just by hanging around and helping other women carry their sacks of avocados, they're able to go back home at the end of the day with some reasonable number of the avocados to resell in their neighborhoods.
Earnings from avocados is fast gaining traction and boosting export revenues across Africa. Despite being listed as one of the industrial crops in Nigeria's agricultural sector, the West African nation is yet to fully harness the potential in avocado trade.
This avocado industry has the potential to earn Nigerian 80 billion naira in export earnings. Now, this avocado industry can provide 10,000 jobs, indirect and direct jobs for Nigerian youths. But because this fruit is not being looked into as a viable crops, all of these economic viabilities is being, underdeveloped. Presently, it doesn't have any significant contribution to the agricultural GDP because it is still at the subsistence level.
Avocados, together with their byproducts, are well sought after by the pharmaceutical and cosmetics industries. But there's a problem of storage, which oftentimes lead to waste. Nigeria could earn so much more from ramping up production of the green gold and establishing a formidable value chain, one that would go beyond consumption to producing extracts for industrial use. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, graduates have been forced to rethink their approach to securing means of income, especially with a high unemployment rate in Africa right now. A young IT graduate in Kenya has chosen to double academics and passion by leveraging on academic qualifications. Sam Jairo is now working to both earn a living in fashion and expand the market's appreciation for dynamic African print in menswear. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with his story.
Quick scans on most polls on top 10 best careers would feature an IT-related profession. This is a sector that continues to gain traction in Africa, and for Sam Jairo, an IT graduate, he has chosen to create a convergence between his skills in IT and his passion for fashion.
Don't consider IT a career, as far as what I learned. I consider IT as an enabler, which basically enables any industry by increasing efficiency and ensuring repeatable processes are either reduced or are improved on. The end objective is to create a fashion brand with international access. Now, the going-ons of how these objectives are achieved is where now IT comes in. There's an aspect of order management, and this means that we now start using tools, IT tools, to create an efficient manufacturing and order management process. So we leveraged on tools like Trello. So once we get a client, we know what they want, we know what they need, put all the requirements of the system, and the system is viewed by at least 4 or 5 people who know what they need, and it makes flow of information easier and quicker. There's the issue of the e-commerce page, which we had to incorporate things like M-Pesa. I got a chance to travel to Istanbul, which for me, I consider to be a fashion capital because I have a very robust fabric industry. And being there basically opened my eyes to the possibilities that exist in the fashion industry. On the outside, it looks very, very plain, but once you open the inside, you get to see a bit of some color. This is also one of our items. This piece got featured in, I think, London Fashion Week and Wowzine magazine. We've got our most premium fabrics. It's called Skabal. We are actually the only fashion brand in Kenya that stock their fabrics. A suit in Skabal fabric would cost a minimum of 166,000 Kenya shillings, and it can go to as high as 400k depending on the quality of the fabric you're getting. The challenges are many, and I'd say one of them is when you're a small brand, you cannot approach manufacturers to make for you items because of minimum order quantities.
It's a very small industry, so it's very hard to find someone who would fit your standard or your criteria in terms of what you want from a cloth.
The international fashion scene has gradually begun to create room on its runway for vibrant African prints and fabrics.
One of the things we wanted to do was to come up with a size chart. A size chart because we appreciate that as Africans we have broad shoulders and broad hips. It's more about demystifying the fact that we've actually found out we were very flamboyant, and combining that with what is prevalently available, and then creating a mix that the modern day man will feel comfortable wearing without per se feeling like he's an ISO.
And through his line, Sam hopes to revive a preference for African print right here. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. Now, South Africa's rand retreated against the dollar in cautious trading ahead of the much-awaited U.S. consumer price data coming out today. Now, the rand moved below 14 rand per dollar for the first time since early January 2020 on Monday, and it did strengthen on Tuesday, helped by stronger than expected manufacturing figures. So it's suddenly headed in a good direction. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.